The first time the sheriff laid eyes on her, she was no more than a shadow slipping between the birches behind the burned-out chapel. A girl by the looks of it, dirty hands, small frame, eyes that caught firelight like they'd been waiting years for something to burn. That had been 16 months back, during the tail end of the Brevin raids, when smoke still twisted out of chimneys long gone cold and dogs wandered masterless down the hills. Sheriff Holden Graves remembered the eyes. Every time a prisoner spat blood or begged, he remembered them, clear as a hunting rifle's iron sight. He'd heard her name first in whispers, Mercy Lark, a ghost story folks swapped in hushed tones over broken bread. She was nothing then, not a threat. A slip of a thing rumored to be stealing from supply caches, cutting horses loose, or whispering deathbed confessions into dying men's ears. The kind of tale that made for soft fireside shivers, harmless, until bodies started showing up wrong. There was Deputy Winslow, found strung from his own stirrup post in West Cora with a darning needle punched through each eyelid. Then Bryce Malloran, half-crook, half-cattleman, discovered in the quarry pit with his boots stuffed in his mouth. Graves had seen men killed out of anger before, out of lust or revenge, but this was different, surgical, methodical, no drunken heat to it. Whoever was doing it, they wanted the town to squirm. A week after Winslow's body swung itself rotten on that post, a note showed up at Graves' office, sealed with the resin of a pine knot. Inside was a piece of linen torn from an old flour sack, and scrawled in the corner in the black ink of crushed pokeberry was a line from a psalm, "The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth." He read that note with a dry mouth and sent for a bounty hunter the next morning. The man who arrived was lean and long-jawed, all bone under sun-split skin. Folks called him Wren, no first name, no past. He rode alone and carried a smoothbore shotgun older than the country itself. Wren didn't smile, didn't talk unless it was time to negotiate or kill. That was fine by Graves. The bounty went up, $2,000 for Mercy Lark, dead or alive. No trial, no quarter. But they couldn't catch her. She was too fast, too quiet. She knew the woods like a snake-nosed stone. At first, Wren trailed her the way a trapper might track a coyote, by the bent grass and the still warm prints. He saw her once, crossing a dry creek just after sundown, the hem of her dress stiff with old blood. Her hair was cut blunt, as if hacked with a belt knife, and her face was smeared with ash. She looked at him like he was the one trespassing. Then she was gone. Every town they passed through whispered the same things, that she slept in hollow logs, that she'd slit a man's throat for looking too long, that she'd been the daughter of a preacher once, and that the preacher had been burned alive with a cross carved into his chest by the same men Graves once swore in under a crooked flag during the last days of the border wars. That part never made the wanted posters. By the third month of the hunt, Wren had begun to wonder, not aloud, not in words, but in the way he moved slower now through the valleys, how he no longer shot at shadows in the trees. He started asking questions in the taverns instead of just flashing the poster. He listened. The stories grew teeth. She'd been 12 when her father was dragged into the fire. She hadn't screamed, just watched, quiet, staring through the smoke with eyes like polished coal, a preacher's daughter, a good girl, until the wrong men came to town wearing tin stars and dirty boots and smelling of boiled rye and slaughterhouse salt. Graves had been one of them. Wren heard that name over and over. "Sheriff Graves?" he asked a wiry man outside Gilden Cross. "Graves and his dogs," the man replied. "But Lark got most of 'em. She's making a ledger, that one, crossing out names." Wren carried those words back with him into the high pines, where snow still clung in patches and birds flew low to the ground. He stopped trailing her like prey. He started following like a question that hadn't yet found an answer. When he saw her again, she was standing over a body, face down in the riverbend mud. Another man with Graves, named somewhere in his past. Mercy looked up and didn't flinch. "You here to kill me?" she asked. "No," Wren said, his voice gravel-slow. "Not yet." She nodded and stepped over the corpse like it was nothing more than a sack of grain. The river made no noise as it took the body. The sheriff got word the next day. The hunter had met the girl and didn't take the shot. He threw a bottle at the wall so hard it cracked the oil lamp. Then he doubled the bounty. Wren didn't go back. He left the poster nailed to a red oak and went deeper into the hills. He wasn't hunting anymore. He was watching something unravel or maybe knit itself back together. A girl remaking herself out of blood and sorrow and rage. She lit her fires low and never stayed in one place longer than a night. Wren kept to the ridges. He saw her tend the wounds of a fevered child in a shanty town, saw her bury a half-mad woman under birch leaves, saw her slit a man's throat in silence, then whisper something into the steaming wound like a prayer. He started dreaming of fire, of ash and bone, and the long howl of justice with no tongue to speak it. Back in town, Graves was stirring up a storm. Deputies rode out in fours, armed with rifles and dogs in fear. They found burned barns and poisoned wells, and their own men hung from trees with their badges melted into their mouths. The hills were turning against them, and still the girl lived. One night Wren approached her camp. She stood without reaching for her knife. The silence between them was old and brittle. "You switching sides?" she asked. "I want to hear it," Wren said. "Which part?" "All of it." She looked at him a long while. Then she sat and began to speak, and the world around them went quiet as if even the trees wanted to listen. To the fire, to the screamless night, to the long, slow walk from girlhood to vengeance, to every name she'd marked on the inside of her thigh so she wouldn't forget. She told him about Graves, about the way the man smelled, about the ring he wore made from a girl's wedding band, about how she'd waited 13 years to start killing and how she'd never once enjoyed it, only needed it like air. Wren didn't interrupt. He just listened, hands folded, shotgun laid across his knees like it was sleeping. When she finished, neither of them said a thing. Then she stood, tossed her knife to the ground between them. "Next time we meet," she said, "you'll have to choose." He nodded, he already had, but he waited until dawn to bury his badge. The frost came early that year, bit down hard on the ridges and stayed long past welcome, whitening the scrub grass and splitting fence posts in half-forgotten farms. It made the trails cruel. Even the deer moved quieter, hoofprints filling with snow before they could be followed. But Mercy Lark didn't need warmth. She needed silence. She found it in the bones of an abandoned sawmill tucked beneath Grief Hollow, a place not even crows lingered over. The roof was half-collapsed and stank of rot, but the beams still held, and it faced the east, where the sun rose like blood through fog. She started carving names into the wood there, one for every man she remembered, some scratched so hard the blade snapped in her hand. Others she had to guess at, faces blurred by years, by fire, by trauma she'd worn like a second skin. But Graves's name was last, etched deep, so deep her knuckles bled before she finished. Down in Garrel's Fork, the sheriff made camp of his own, took over the schoolhouse, ran out the children, turned the chalkboard into a map of vengeance, lines spidering from pin to pin like veins in a hanged man's neck. He wasn't sheriff anymore, not truly, not since the council back east had written him off as a regional failure. But he still wore the star and folks still called him by the title, maybe out of habit, maybe out of fear. He'd started gathering men, not deputies, not law, mercenaries, drunks, discharged soldiers with burn scars and no God left, men who didn't ask questions if the pay was high and the work meant blood. They came with dynamite, hounds, and stolen army rifles, set up checkpoints in the ravines, paid boys to snitch, cut out the tongues of the ones who didn't. Mercy kept moving. Sometimes she traveled with a false name, dressed as a mute widow selling buttons and bones. Other times she traveled barefoot through the snow, face wrapped in crow feathers to frighten off any who might look close. She stopped leaving the psalm notes behind, stopped whispering prayers. The Lord had done his part, now came hers. Wren trailed in her wake, silent as a ghost, not always behind, sometimes ahead, warning off hunters with a knife to the gut or a match to their whiskey barrels. He never called it mercy. He wasn't built for that word, but he remembered her voice, steady as stone, speaking through the night, and something in him shifted, slow as ice breaking under its own weight. They crossed paths again in the bowels of a mining town where even the rats had left. Mercy was knelt over a man whose name had been carved into a child's memory with a branding iron. She had opened him slow, surgical, precise, and not for pleasure. Wren watched, arms folded, and said nothing until she was finished. "You think Graves'll run?" he asked. "No," she said. "He wants to watch me die. Then he'll wait, lay snares, dig traps. I've stepped in worse." There was no smile in her, just resolve. A cold, endless kind, the sort men can't understand till it's too late. That night they shared a fire. She cleaned her blade with snow. He counted bullets. Around them the world was bone-white and breathless. "You gonna help me?" she asked, eyes on the flames. "I'll do what needs done," Wren said. You always this vague. He looked at her the way a wolf might look at a cliff, measuring depth. You're not the only one with a list, he said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, just long. Wren didn't speak again, and she didn't press. There was a weight to shared blood, to quiet oaths sealed not with hands or words, but by the understanding of how much it costs to keep breathing when you've been hollowed out. Graves heard of their meeting within the week. The snitch came with one ear missing, dragged into the schoolhouse by a pair of men who stank of mud and tobacco spit. Told the sheriff the girl and the bounty hunter were riding together now. Graves listened, calm, jaw ticking, then shot the snitch in the leg, left him screaming on the stoop, told the rest of them to take notes. Trust was earned in pieces and broken in full. He sent his fastest men south, promised gold for the girl's head, more if Wren's was mounted beside it. They burned 2 villages trying to find them, shot a woman in the spine because she had black hair and walked with a limp. None of it mattered. Mercy was always a day ahead, and every time Graves struck, she struck back. She poisoned the water in Belling's Gorge, left 6 men vomiting blood into the ice. She set fire to a supply cache north of the Divide, killed 3 guards and strung their corpses on a ridge so the crows would carry the message. She stopped using a blade so often, started using rope, arsenic, rumors. Fear moved faster than bullets, and by the time Graves realized it, half his men had fled. But not all. One of them caught her near Widow's Creek. She slipped on the shale, lost footing, dislocated her shoulder. The man who found her was tall, younger than the rest, eyes too wide for the work he did. He pointed his rifle and told her not to move. She didn't, though. She just looked at him. You know what he's paying you for? She asked. Dead or alive, he said, voice thin as old cloth. You think I deserve that? I don't know. That's the problem. The boy's hands trembled. She stood. He didn't fire. She walked past him, shoulder dangling like meat, and he let her go. When Graves found him 2 days later, he was dangling from a cottonwood, a note pinned to his chest. Weakness gets you nothing but rope. Graves didn't recognize the handwriting. He ordered the dogs out again, set fire to half the forest north of Redmarsh trying to smoke her out, but Mercy was already gone, healing somewhere, waiting. Wren had found her in the hollow of a black elm, shoulder set by his own hand. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer comfort, just stood guard until she could hold a knife again. The next time she moved, it was with purpose. She was done pruning. Now she wanted the root. And Graves knew it in the way animals know storms before they break. He started fortifying the schoolhouse, boarded windows, set traps, drilled his men like soldiers, carried a shotgun in one hand and a revolver in the other, always cocked, always loaded. Sleep stopped coming. He muttered to himself in the night. Sometimes walked the length of the hall in his boots with nothing on but his long johns and the star. He knew she was close. Closer every day. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the girl he once hunted like a dog was no longer running. She was circling, quiet, patient, starving for justice the way others starve for bread, and now she had Wren at her back, a man with a name made of silence, whose own war hadn't ended, just gone underground. Together, they weren't a girl and a hunter. They were a reckoning. The first snow of deep winter came black with ash, not from the sky, but from the burned carcass of a farmhouse lit aflame 2 nights west of Garrel's Fork. Wren found it first. Flames still hissed in the bones of the structure, cows frozen stiff with their eyes pecked out, the wind sharp with scorched hair and barrel soot. No bodies, just blood sprayed wide and aimless, like whoever died did so in panic. Graves left no note this time, just the ruin. Wren crouched in the half-melted doorway, finger running through a bootprint too narrow to belong to a man. He knew whose it was. But it was the second set that made him pause, larger, deeper, towing out with a limp. Someone else had come looking after her, someone still chasing. She was being hunted again. He found her a day later in a shack buried into the side of a hill, one of those old smuggler dens sealed behind bramble and brush. She was curled by a coal-burnt stove, her hands wrapped tight in rags soaked with tincture. Her eyes flicked open when he stepped in, no fear in them, just recognition. They're not just after me now, she said. I saw, he replied. 4 riders, one's a woman, tall, rifle scars down her cheek, the others I didn't see. They from Graves. No, she said, they're worse. They're paid through him, but they don't answer to him. She coughed and it sounded wet. Her skin was pale, lips cracked. He moved to the stove and added kindling. They sat in silence while it caught. I'll kill them first, she said. He looked over, before Graves. They're in the way. She didn't ask him to help, she never had, but he reached for his rifle anyway. They set out that night, the cold peeling skin from their knuckles, their breath turning to stone. Wren led them north through the pine tunnels, over frozen creeks and the backs of deer trails only the desperate still used. They followed tracks where they could, scattered ash, hoofprints cut wide for speed. Found a campsite where the woman had butchered a jackrabbit and left its head hanging in a tree like a warning. The woman's name, they would learn later, was Sabine. She wasn't a bounty hunter, not exactly. She collected debt in flesh. Ran a gang made up of runaways and war ghosts, folks too broken for the law and too vicious for the army. They didn't chase people, they cornered them, and what they did after wasn't meant for coin. It was art, cruel, brutal art. When Mercy and Wren caught up, it was at the edge of a canyon split by wind and time. Sabine's crew had circled a wagon and nailed a man to its side, arms out, ribs broken open like wings. He was still breathing when Mercy stepped from the brush. "Which one of you takes the credit?" she asked, voice calm as stone. Sabine turned, her mouth curled like it knew secrets. "You the girl with the price on her spine. I'm the one Graves wants buried. That makes 2 of us." Mercy blinked. "You running too?" Sabine spat. "No, just owed a favor, thought I'd collect." Wren stepped from the trees behind Mercy, and Sabine's face changed. "You didn't say you brought company. I didn't think I'd need to. You still don't." What followed wasn't a gunfight, it was closer to slaughter. The man with the axe went first. Wren's bullet took the back of his head clean off. The one with the saber screamed, then drowned in his own blood. Sabine moved like a wind-spun blade, but Mercy was faster. She had a knife in her sleeve and a second in her boot, and by the time Sabine drew breath, Mercy had already carved a smile in her throat. The snow soaked up the blood. The canyon watched without blinking. Only one was left alive. A kid, barely 16, teeth chattering, hands still stained with the nailed man's blood. "Why?" Wren asked him. "He said she killed good," the boy said, pointing at Mercy. "Said she was righteous. We wanted to see." "Did you?" The boy didn't answer. Mercy leaned close. "You saw wrong. She didn't kill him, not then. She made him walk. Told him to find Graves and deliver a message. No more shadows. I'm coming in daylight." By the time he reached the schoolhouse, frozen and limping, Graves was down to half his men. The rest had fled or been found hanging from the gallows trees along the trade road. He listened to the boy, took the bloodied coat Mercy had tied to his back, and stared at the torn sleeve where her name was stitched in thread. He ordered the town evacuated, told the women and children to head south. Anyone who stayed did so at their own risk. He turned the schoolhouse into a fortress, reinforced the windows with stove iron, dug trenches, set black powder beneath the floorboards. Wren watched from the ridge as it unfolded, quiet beside Mercy. "He'll burn it," he said. "He can try. You ready to die for this?" She looked over at him. "I died 13 years ago. This is just what came after." That night they cut the telegraph wires, shot the horses in the stable, spiked the well. Graves woke to silence. On the morning of the second snowfall, they came down into town. 2 figures walking side by side. No disguises. No masks. Wren carried the long rifle. Mercy only her blades. The men on the roof opened fire. Wren shot them both through the eye, never breaking stride. They stepped over corpses like river stones, past shops boarded in fear, past the church with its bell tower shattered. Graves was waiting on the schoolhouse porch, shotgun in one hand, eyes rimmed red. He didn't speak until they were 20 paces off. "You think this is justice," he barked. "You think I don't remember her. You think I didn't know what would happen." Mercy didn't stop walking. He cocked the shotgun. She liked it, he said. Your mother, she begged. That was the last thing he ever said. Her knife hit him before the lie finished forming, right below the chin. The second lodged in his thigh. He dropped to his knees, coughing blood. Wren stepped forward, but Mercy held up a hand. No, he's mine. She didn't kill him quick. She told him every name, every child buried, every woman whose face she couldn't remember but whose screams she never forgot. She told him how he smelled when he laughed over her father's grave. Then she took out the last knife. She made it slow. And when it was over, she dropped the badge he once wore onto his chest and walked out into the cold, leaving the schoolhouse to burn behind her. Wren followed. Neither looked back. The smoke lingered for days. Black and bitter, it threaded through the hills like a curse, clinging to trees and choking the streams. Vultures circled the ruins of Garrel's Fork while wolves nosed through the ash. The schoolhouse burned to its stone bones, and the fire spread, swallowing homes and outhouses and fences like it had been waiting. Mercy didn't watch it fall. She'd already gone north by the time the bell tower collapsed, her boots soaked, her knives clean. Wren rode behind her now, not as protector, not as equal, something else. A tether. He didn't ask where they were going. The blood had quieted something in her, but it hadn't filled the hollow. Graves was gone, and yet she still moved with purpose. You got more names? He asked once as they passed a thicket of yew trees, the sky heavy with snow. No, she said. He nodded, let it settle, but she didn't stop walking. They reached an old crossroads 2 days out, where the bones of a forgotten church slouched into the dirt and the trees bent in like they'd been eavesdropping. There, Mercy finally paused. This is where they swore him in, she said. Sheriff Graves, just after the war. Wren looked around. The place was quiet. Sacred, maybe, in the way graveyards are. Mercy walked to the steps and knelt. Her fingers dug through the frozen soil until they struck wood. She pulled out a small box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a folded letter, a child's ring, and the photograph of a woman with a blood-wet smile. My mother, she said. Wren watched her. There was something else in her now, tender but not soft. Grief had changed shape, hardened into resolve. You said there weren't more names, he said. There aren't, she replied, but there's more work. The letter, she explained, was from a man named Dalden Morrow, once a federal marshal who tried to raise alarm over Graves and his militia during the early days of the territory's shift. He disappeared a year after the war's end. She'd found traces of his name in courthouse logs, old newspapers, but never a body. Think he's alive? Wren asked. If he is, he'll know what Graves covered up. Wren chewed the inside of his cheek. What does it matter? Graves is dead. His rot is the land still poisoned, folks still scared. So you want to fix the world now? She didn't answer, but her hand curled tight around the photograph. They headed east toward Split River, a place where the old order still wore clean uniforms and lied in clean churches. Along the way, Mercy kept quiet. She stopped leaving fire behind her, helped a woman birth twins in a snowstorm, buried a fevered boy with her own hands. She moved like someone trying to stitch something back together, even if she didn't believe it could hold. But the world hadn't forgotten her. At the edge of Split River, they ran into a checkpoint. Men in blue coats, eyes too young for their rifles, stopped them with raised hands and hard questions. Wren answered with a name off an old war ledger. Mercy didn't speak. They let them pass, but one of the soldiers watched her too long. That night, they didn't light a fire. The following day, posters reappeared, not the old ones. These were new, plain ink, full name. Mercy Lark, wanted for sedition, murder, impersonation of federal authority. Someone was rewriting the story. Mercy, the orphan girl who'd crawled from smoke and reaped vengeance with a blade, was being repainted as a rebel, a political threat, not a person. Wren watched her face as she read it. No rage, just weariness, but she didn't throw it away. She folded it neatly and tucked it under her coat. Split River was a town too clean to trust. Stone buildings, uniformed guards, a whitewashed courthouse where men sat behind paper and denied the dirt on their boots. They found Dalden Morrow in a home for shell-shocked veterans, his beard matted, teeth gone. He didn't speak for the first hour. But when he did, he said Graves had never acted alone. There was a list, Morrow wheezed. 6 men, all sworn in together. Graves was just the loudest. Mercy leaned forward. You remember the others. Not names, just scars. One had a brand on his cheek. One walked like he had glass in his foot. One had a whistle he wore like a goddamn medal. She memorized every detail. Wren looked at her when they left. You sure you're not just building another list? I'm sure. He didn't press. That night someone tried to kill her. A sniper from the grain silo, quiet and patient. He waited until she stepped into the square for water. Would have had her heart if Wren hadn't seen the glint first. The bullet caught her shoulder instead. She fell behind the well wall, bleeding, breath hissing through her teeth. Wren climbed the silo like a ladder was a promise and left the man twitching in the snow with a knife in his chest. He dragged the body to her feet. Recognize him. She looked, no, but his boots are military. The noose was tightening. Whoever remained of Graves's circle didn't want her alive. Not for trial, not for revenge, just gone, erased. Wren sat beside her as she stitched her shoulder closed, jaw tight. You could stop, he said. You think I want to die. I think you're getting close. She looked at him, really looked. I'm not chasing death. I'm just not afraid of what comes next. They moved again by moonlight, following whispers. The man with the brand on his cheek had become a rail baron out of Weatherlow. The one with the limp now served as a judge in Blackhill. The whistler ran a missionary school in New Harper. Graves was a symptom. The sickness was still spreading. And Mercy Lark was done waiting. They headed west. Wren didn't ask what came next. He knew. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. And justice, when left too long, doesn't ask. It takes. Weatherlow stood crooked on the edge of the desert like it hadn't decided yet whether to die or beg for rain. The rail lines carved through the valley like fresh scars, black steel on rust earth, and trains rolled through without slowing, full of soldiers, munitions, and timber stolen from mountains that no longer stood. A town built on weight and silence. Mercy and Wren arrived just after dusk, when the heat had broken but the dust still clung to the skin like grief. They didn't speak for hours. There was no need. They knew what the end looked like. Baron Shaw, the man with the brand on his cheek, lived high above the town in a 2-story manor flown in piece by piece from back east. Whitewashed wood, glass windows, coal-fired bath inside. A man who had spent the last decade covering his violence with prosperity, who wore suits stitched in Baltimore and drank whiskey older than the war he profited from. Mercy walked into the rail office first. The clerk stood up, saw the dried blood at her collar, the coil of rope on her hip. He didn't ask her business. Wren came through the back an hour later after the clerk had vanished. They climbed the hill together under the cover of a dry wind, the stars flickering like judgment overhead. Mercy didn't carry a gun, just her knives and a strip of black fabric she tied around her jaw. Wren had brought a carbine, but he carried it low. At the top of the hill, 2 guards waited with cigars in their mouths and steel in their hands. Neither spoke before the killing started. Wren dropped one with a shot to the temple. Mercy took the other up close, quick and neat, a cut behind the knee, a second under the ribs. They moved through the manor like ghosts through a battlefield. No rush, no panic, just momentum. Baron Shaw was found in his study, hands still inked from a ledger, his lips mouthing the first syllable of her name when the blade went in. He tried to bargain, promised her land, wealth, silence, but Mercy didn't want any of those things. She wanted him to remember. When it was done, she carved the shape of the brand into his neck and left him slumped over his desk. A ledger still open beneath him, tallying profit over lives. They burned the house on their way out. No note this time, no message. The wind would carry the truth. 2 weeks later, they reached Blackhill. The judge had soldiers in his pocket and blood under his nails. The courthouse was a fortress. Mercy didn't try to break in. She walked into town at noon and hung one of his men from the church bell with a sign that read, "I remember everything." The judge tried to flee the next morning, didn't make it past the city gates. That night she stood over his body and whispered a name he'd long since forgotten. Wren buried the body himself, quiet, unmarked, no triumph in it, just necessity. New Harper took longer. The missionary school was guarded by the pious and the willfully blind. Children played in the courtyard. Women sang hymns that trembled on the edge of sorrow. And the man who wore a whistle on a silver chain called himself Brother Talcott now. Said he'd found God in the war. Said he was forgiven. Mercy didn't speak. She waited. 3 days, no move, no noise. Wren didn't ask her why she paused. He knew the weight of it. On the fourth night, she entered the chapel and sat in the back row. Waited until Talcott stepped to the pulpit, voice rising in false sanctity. He saw her, froze. She stood, said nothing, just held up a child's ring between two fingers. He turned to run. Wren locked the chapel doors. When it ended, she left the ring on the altar, and the blood stayed pooled beneath the pews until long after dawn. After that, they didn't speak for days. The list was gone, the past laid bare and bleeding behind them. The land didn't feel healed, just quieter. Like it was waiting for something to grow back, knowing full well it never would. They rode north into the dry hills, where the soil cracked and wind carried no name. Mercy's knives stayed sheathed. Wren stopped looking over his shoulder. They slept beneath a split cedar one night and woke to the sound of a hawk slicing through the sky. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked her. "I have." "What stopped you?" "Nothing's left to chase." He nodded. She looked down at her hands. They were calloused, scarred, sun-worn. The hands of someone who had taken too much and never forgotten the first cut. "What about you?" she asked. Wren looked out across the rocks. "I was waiting for someone to do what I couldn't." "You think we did it?" "I think we did enough." The wind blew, it didn't answer. By dusk, they'd reached a bluff overlooking the valley below. Smoke no longer marked their path. The world was vast again, uncertain. Mercy stood at the edge, hair tangled in the wind, eyes searching not for what was gone, but for what might still come. No towns to burn. No names to cross. Only silence. She turned to Wren. "I'm not going back," she said. "Didn't think you would." And with that she walked, into the dark, into the quiet, into a world that had once hunted her like a dog and now, without a master, would have to learn to live without her teeth in its throat. She didn't vanish. She became something else. A story. A warning. A shape in the trees when justice comes too late. And Wren, long after the dust had settled, would still look to the horizon with a memory at his side and say, not with regret, but with a kind of reverence, "She didn't survive the hunt. She ended it."